I couldn't believe it at first. Packages I'd been waiting for, my new laptop, gifts for my sister, even my groceries, kept disappearing. At first, I thought the delivery drivers were messing up. But then I started noticing her. The woman who claimed to protect our neighborhood was always watching, always hovering. My packages weren't lost, they were taken. And she wasn't subtle about it. Months went by, and my frustration turned to anger. I knew I had to confront her, but I had no idea how far this would go, or how shocking the final showdown would be. What would I do when the last package finally forced her hand? I'd always loved the quiet rhythm of our neighborhood. Tree-lined streets, manicured lawns, and the kind of neighbors who nodded hello without asking too much of anyone. Our house sat near the corner, a modest two-story with a small garden we had spent years cultivating, roses by the fence, herbs by the kitchen window, and a tiny vegetable patch that my kids loved tending. Life felt peaceful, ordinary, the kind you dream about when looking for a place to call home. I worked long hours, my spouse juggled shifts at the hospital. And yet, somehow, we always felt connected to the rhythm of this community. Weekends were for bike rides, barbecues, and the occasional porch chat with neighbors we'd known for years. It was comfortable, predictable, and safe. Or so I thought. The first sign of tension was subtle, almost laughable in hindsight. A small note tucked under our door about improperly placed garden ornaments, or a friendly reminder that packages should not sit on the porch for more than a day. We shrugged it off, thinking the HOA just wanted to keep things neat. But little things piled up. An inspection notice slipped under the door, a stern email about lawn edging, and casual mentions of new guidelines. During board meetings that sounded harmless enough, but left a pit in my stomach. I couldn't see it then, but the quiet neighborly vigilance we'd taken for granted was turning into something else. Someone was watching, judging, and soon, they wouldn't just stop at polite notes. Every little misstep, packages left on the porch, a trash can left out too long, a hedge slightly overgrown, was becoming a spark waiting to ignite. And when the first package went missing, I realized this wasn't just about rules anymore. Something about our peaceful neighborhood had shifted. And the person at the center of it. She had a way of making everyone feel powerless, except her. At first, the small notes and polite reminders felt harmless, almost comical. "Please remove unauthorized items from your porch," one said. Another, "Your hedge must be trimmed to meet community standards." I thought it was just bureaucracy doing its thing. But slowly, the tiny irritations started to add up, forming a constant, nagging pressure that seeped into every corner of my life. Packages that once arrived on time began vanishing. I chalked it up to a mistake. Delivery errors, misplaced boxes. But it kept happening. At first, it was the occasional small item, a book, a set of spices. Then, weeks passed, and bigger things started disappearing. The laptop I'd been saving up for, a birthday gift for my daughter, even groceries vanished. It wasn't just negligence. Someone was taking them, watching, and enjoying the power it gave them. And as much as I wanted to believe it was random, there was a method to the chaos. The HOA board meetings were a spectacle of absurdity. Rules were enforced with a rigidity that bordered on obsession, and the woman at the center, our community guardian, had a way of twisting regulations to make you feel guilty for even breathing wrong. I watched her stand at the podium, clipboard in hand, condemning neighbors for trivial infractions. A slightly tilted mailbox, a non-conforming doormat, a bicycle left too long by the curb. Every warning came with veiled threats of fines, legal action, or social shaming within the community. I tried to keep my head down. I followed every rule obsessively. Packages were collected immediately, hedges trimmed obsessively, and garbage cans hidden the moment they were emptied. But nothing worked. The notes turned into official warnings. The warnings turned into fines. And the fines felt personal, like a constant reminder that someone was watching my life for mistakes, large and small. One afternoon, I came home to find a letter slipped under the door. The envelope was crisp, the writing precise, almost clinical. It wasn't a warning this time. It was a citation. S. 154 on proper storage of personal items on community property. The note made no sense. I hadn't left anything on community property. I had double-checked. But the message was clear: the rules didn't matter. Power mattered. And she had it. The psychological pressure became suffocating. I began to notice her everywhere. She would appear when I walked the dog, seemingly out of nowhere. Clipboard in hand, eyes scanning, calculating. Her gaze alone was enough to make my heart race. Packages left at my doorstep would mysteriously vanish when I wasn't looking. Every interaction felt like a test. Every small misstep a potential accusation. The neighborhood felt less like a community, and more like a stage where she directed every scene. Then came the most audacious moment. One morning, I ordered a set of high-end kitchen appliances I'd been saving for months. Delivery was scheduled for 10 a.m. I sat at the kitchen window, heart pounding, waiting. At 10:15, the delivery truck arrived. I grabbed the door as fast as I could, but before I could reach it, she appeared. Standing there, arms folded, she glared at the delivery men. I froze. She didn't even speak, just stared, calculating. And when the delivery men left, I realized my package was gone. Just like that, months of anticipation, stolen in a moment. Anger boiled inside me, but it was paired with fear. Confronting her openly felt risky. She wielded her authority like a weapon, and I wasn't sure where the law ended and her influence began. I began documenting everything. Timestamps, photos, video of deliveries, every suspicious note or warning. The more I tried to gather evidence, the more I realized just how far her influence had spread. Other neighbors whispered quietly in my driveway, telling me about similar incidents. Packages gone, fines for trivialities, harassment thinly veiled as community care. The turning point came one evening when I returned home from work to find a small, hastily written note under the door. Last warning. Next step is legal action. My blood ran cold. I had followed every rule, yet here she was, threatening me. It was no longer just petty neighborhood drama. It was harassment. And she knew it. My frustration turned into determination. I would not be bullied. I would not let her ruin my family's peace. I started strategizing. I spoke to neighbors who had quietly suffered under her reign, piecing together stories that mirrored my own. A pattern emerged. She targeted anyone who didn't fall in line perfectly, anyone who dared to assert independence or even ownership over their own property. I realized I wasn't alone. There was strength in numbers and a way to turn the tables. But it required patience, planning, and a willingness to push back against someone who thought rules were hers to manipulate. Meanwhile, the fines kept coming. The notes became more aggressive. I was now facing multiple citations for things I hadn't even realized were offense-worthy. And then, one morning, a new rule appeared on the HOA's bulletin board, posted with the triumphant air of a dictator announcing a decree. All deliveries must be placed in the community-approved drop boxes. Failure to comply will result in immediate fines. It was clear she had been orchestrating the package thefts all along. The rules weren't there to protect the neighborhood. They were there to protect her control. And every citizen in the community was just a pawn. I stared at the notice, hands trembling, realizing I had to act, but carefully. Every move could escalate things further. The tension built with every day. Every time a delivery arrived, my anxiety spiked. Every glance from her felt like a threat. I had to be strategic. I had to outsmart her. And deep down, I knew the moment of confrontation was coming. I just didn't know how explosive it would be, or how satisfying. Then, one rainy afternoon, the moment arrived. A delivery came early, before she could even notice. I hid, camera rolling, adrenaline pumping. Every second felt like hours. And when she finally appeared, the look on her face, shock, anger, disbelief, told me that the last package would be the one that changed everything. The day had finally arrived. The one I had been anticipating, planning for, and fearing in equal measure. My heart pounded in my chest as I carried the last package, wrapped carefully, across the driveway. Rain had soaked the streets, and the clouds hung low and heavy over our neighborhood, mirroring the storm of emotions inside me. Every step felt like it could set off an explosion. I had cameras hidden, timestamps ready, and a strategy that I had rehearsed endlessly in my mind. She didn't know I was prepared. She didn't know that the moment of reckoning had come. From the corner of my eye, I saw her approach. Clipboard in hand, eyes scanning, calculating, ready to pounce on yet another violation. She had the confidence of someone who believed she could bend reality itself to her will. Every glare, every pointed comment, every scolding note over the past months had built her into this figure of power. And yet, today, the power balance was about to shift. I placed the package carefully on the porch, not just for delivery, but as bait. My hands trembled with a mix of fear and determination. I took a step back, keeping perfectly still, watching her as she approached. She paused at the edge of the driveway, her eyes locking onto the package. The familiar glint of triumph appeared in her gaze. She thought she knew the game. She thought she controlled it. And then I activated the cameras. Hidden in plain sight, recording the entire scene. Every second, every movement, every subtle expression would be captured. The truth would be undeniable. She reached for the package with her usual sense of entitlement. But this time, it was different. This time, her hand hovered above the box as I stepped out from behind the shrubbery, voice calm but firm. "Excuse me," I said. "That's mine." Her eyes flicked up, recognition dawning slowly, and then the first crack in her armor appeared. She hesitated, almost imperceptibly, as though the universe itself had interrupted her routine. I continued, my voice rising just enough to carry to the neighbors peeking curiously from their windows. "All of this, the notes, the fines, the stolen packages, has been recorded. I've got months of evidence." For a moment, she looked flustered, as if the world had tilted slightly. A flicker of panic crossed her features. The clipboard, once her shield of authority, now felt heavy and useless. The power she had wielded over the neighborhood, the invisible strings she had pulled to make everyone feel small, was slipping through her fingers. She tried to speak, to assert control. This is just community standards." "Standards?" I interrupted, my tone rising with controlled fury. "This is harassment. Theft. Abuse of power. You've spent months violating every boundary of decency, hiding behind your rules to bully people who were just trying to live their lives." The camera captured everything: her widening eyes, the sudden halt in her usual confident stride, the neighbors emerging cautiously from behind their curtains and doors, whispering, pointing, and watching. I had expected this to be tense, But I hadn't anticipated the collective relief and anticipation of the community. There was a palpable energy, a mix of fear, curiosity, and silent cheering. She tried to regain composure, straightening her shoulders, adjusting the clipboard like a weapon. "You don't understand. This is about protecting the neighborhood." "Protecting?" I shot back, feeling my pulse spike. "You've stolen my packages. You've harassed my family. You've fined people for things that don't even exist. And now, the entire neighborhood knows it." A hush fell over the street. Even the birds seemed to pause mid-flight. She was vulnerable, exposed, caught in the act, and everyone could see it. The weight of her actions, the months of petty tyranny, sank in. Her confident facade faltered completely. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. I stepped closer and held up the last package, the one that had been missing for weeks, the one that had been the ultimate test. "This is the last one," I said. "And today, it stays where it belongs." For a split second, she froze. The neighbors leaned forward, caught between shock and anticipation. And then, she lunged. Not violently, but with the audacity that had defined her. She reached for the package, trying to snatch it back, as if force could rewrite reality. I held my ground, camera rolling, hands steady. "No," I said simply, my voice carrying every ounce of months, long frustration, fear, and determination. "You don't get to decide what belongs to me." Not anymore. The neighbors started to gather at a cautious distance, murmuring, whispering, pointing. Some recorded on their phones. Others just watched, mouths slightly open, as the woman's authority collapsed in real time. She realized she had no allies, no hidden power, no mechanism to enforce her petty rules this time. Every stare, every judgment, every stolen package now reflected back on her. The final humiliation came not with anger, but with the undeniable evidence I held in my hands and recorded on tape. Notes, emails, delivery logs, fines, eyewitness accounts from neighbors. All of it exposed her manipulation, her obsession with control, and her cruelty disguised as diligence. She had built her kingdom on fear, but fear doesn't hold up under light and scrutiny. I took a step back, letting the silence sink in. She stood there, mouth open, clipboard dangling uselessly, as the reality of her actions washed over her. For the first time, she seemed small, fragile, human. A stark contrast to the image of untouchable authority she had cultivated. And then, the final act, the neighbors began speaking. Quietly at first, then with increasing confidence, sharing their own stories, their own stolen packages, their own fines. The woman's attempts to interject were drowned out by the chorus of collective truth. Each voice chipped away at her constructed power, and with every confession, her intimidation lost more of its edge. I watched as she stumbled, retreating slightly, then glancing around for some form of support. None came. Not a single neighbor stood beside her. For months, she had relied on the perception of control. Today, she had none. Finally, I took the last package and opened it, letting the contents spill out as a symbol of reclaiming what had been stolen. Not just from me, but from every neighbor who had suffered under her watch. Laughter, relief, and whispers of approval rippled through the crowd. She tried to speak again, but the words faltered, meaningless against the mountain of evidence and the wave of community solidarity. For the first time in months, I felt a surge of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in weeks: victory. Not just personal, but collective, a sense that fairness, however delayed, had returned. The oppressive weight of her oversight lifted, if only slightly, from the street. And yet, even as she finally slinked away, muttering about rules and regulations, I knew the story wasn't entirely over. The cameras had captured everything. The HOA board could no longer ignore what had happened. Legal action was likely, consequences were imminent, and the neighborhood had seen exactly who she really was. The rain had slowed, but the air still felt charged, electric, as though the clouds themselves had witnessed the moment of reckoning. I looked around at the neighbors, some smiling, some still cautious, and realized something important: power thrives in silence, but truth thrives in courage. And as I stepped back, leaving the package in plain view, I couldn't help but ask myself, and the quiet streets that had watched the showdown unfold, what it takes to finally reclaim what's yours when someone else has spent months convincing you it's theirs. The aftermath of the confrontation felt almost surreal. For weeks, I replayed the scene in my mind. The rain-soaked driveway, her stunned expression, the neighbors slowly emerging, and the cameras that had captured every single act of audacity, every stolen package, every misuse of authority. The relief was palpable, but it was tempered by the knowledge that while one battle had been won, the war with the HOA's bureaucracy and legal apparatus was far from over. Immediately after the incident, I began sharing the recorded evidence with the HOA board and the neighbors who had quietly endured similar harassment. Emails, videos, delivery logs, and documentation of every arbitrary fine, all of it was compiled meticulously, creating an unassailable record of the months-long abuse. The board could no longer ignore the mounting evidence, nor could they continue to side with the woman who had wielded power like a weapon. Under the guise of community standards, the first tangible change came surprisingly quickly. Within a week, the board sent an official notice acknowledging the complaints, stating that they would be reviewing all fines issued in the past year. A small victory, yes, but one that felt monumental after months of frustration. Neighbors who had felt powerless began sharing their own stories openly, emboldened by the knowledge that someone had finally stood up and held the HOA accountable. Conversations that had once been hushed in driveways or whispered over fences became public discussions. Her influence, once intimidating, began to unravel almost immediately. Without allies on the board, without the backing of fearful neighbors, her authority evaporated. She attempted to resist, sending emails that insisted she had been protecting the community and threatening legal action against anyone who questioned her. But her words carried far less weight than before. The cameras, the logs, the neighbors' testimonies, all of it created a record that left her position untenable. By the end of the month, she had resigned from the HOA board. It was anticlimactic, in a way, no dramatic courtroom showdown, no fiery public speech, but it was definitive. She no longer had the power to bully, harass, or manipulate. The community, for the first time in years, breathed a collective sigh of relief. The streets felt lighter, friendlier, more like the neighborhood we had all imagined when we first moved in. But the resolution didn't stop there. The fines she had imposed arbitrarily reversed, refunds issued, apologies circulated, not from her directly, but from the HOA as an institution, acknowledging that months of harassment and unfair enforcement had occurred under their watch. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was significant. Every neighbor who had felt small, belittled, or powerless suddenly felt recognized, validated, and free. For my family, the personal impact was profound. The constant anxiety that had hovered over us, the fear of checking the porch for another missing package, the tension in the household during board meetings, all of it lifted. The children could play freely in the yard without the shadow of arbitrary rules hanging over them. Weekends felt joyful again, filled with laughter and the quiet satisfaction of reclaiming the sense of safety that had been chipped away month by month. I also took proactive steps to ensure the neighborhood stayed that way. I volunteered to help organize community meetings, establish transparent channels for reporting issues, and implement clear, fair guidelines for delivery and property concerns. The goal wasn't revenge, it was prevention. By creating systems that were visible, accountable, and equitable, I wanted to ensure no one could exploit fear and secrecy to exert control over others again. The transformation in the neighborhood was remarkable. Neighbors began interacting more openly. People shared packages, offered help, and looked out for one another rather than being suspicious or fearful. The tension that had hung over every mailbox, every porch, every sidewalk began to dissipate. It was subtle at first, small gestures of friendliness that had been absent for months. It grew quickly into a renewed sense of community. Interestingly, the woman herself seemed diminished in her attempts to regain relevance. Without the mechanisms of authority at her disposal, she became a marginal figure. Occasionally murmuring complaints, but mostly ignored, her attempts to intimidate or manipulate were powerless in the face of collective accountability. The irony was sharp. She had built a reputation as the ultimate enforcer, only to be undone by transparency and courage. There were broader lessons as well. I realized that the strength of a community doesn't lie in the hands of one person, even if that person wields authority. Power can only thrive in silence, in fear, in the absence of collective action. When people speak up, document wrongdoing, and act together, even the most insidious attempts at control crumble. It wasn't about confrontation alone. It was about preparation, evidence, strategy, and the willingness to see a problem through to its end. I also understood the emotional cost of complacency. For months, I had endured stress, sleepless nights, and a constant sense of violation because I had initially hoped the situation would resolve itself or that rules would be applied fairly. It never would have, not without action. This realization became a lesson. I couldn't unlearn justice, in any community or personal context, often requires courage, persistence, and a willingness to face discomfort head-on. In the months that followed, the neighborhood evolved in subtle but meaningful ways. The HOA established a transparent appeals process, which included a community review board to evaluate fines and complaints fairly. Packages were no longer stolen or mysteriously missing, because rules were now clear and enforceable, and residents knew how to hold each other accountable. Trust returned, not blindly, but as a conscious effort to rebuild relationships and community cohesion. I also noticed changes in myself. The experience forced me to confront fear, frustration, and a sense of helplessness I hadn't realized I carried. Standing up against an unjust system taught me that resilience is as much about strategy as it is about courage. It's about choosing carefully when to act, documenting thoroughly, and holding firm, even when intimidation feels overwhelming. The triumph wasn't just about reclaiming packages or silencing a bully. It was about reclaiming confidence, agency, and the power to protect my family and community. Looking back, the incident has become a kind of cautionary tale. It reminds me, and anyone who hears the story, that rules without accountability can become instruments of oppression. Institutions, even those meant to serve and protect, are only as ethical as the people who operate them. When oversight fails, vigilance is required, not just for personal protection, but for the well-being of everyone around us. And yet, there's a strange, almost poetic satisfaction in how things ended. Months of tension, stolen packages, anxiety, and petty harassment culminated in a single moment of decisive action that changed everything. It wasn't about revenge. It was about balance, fairness, and reclaiming what had been taken, piece by piece. The final image I carry in my mind isn't her defeat, but the neighborhood coming together, neighbors sharing stories, smiling, organizing together, and finally feeling safe again. Even now, I can still remember the precise moment when I placed that last package on the porch and watched her reach for it, only to realize she had lost control. That flash of realization on her face, the sudden silence from the neighbors, the knowledge that months of intimidation had come to an abrupt, undeniable end. It's a memory that lingers, a reminder that standing up matters. In the end, the greatest impact wasn't legal, procedural, or financial. It was emotional and communal. The streets no longer carry the tension of unseen judgment. Porches, mailboxes, and gardens are spaces of enjoyment rather than fear. And the lesson resonates beyond our little neighborhood. Accountability, courage, and persistence can overturn even the most entrenched systems of control. For anyone watching, here's the takeaway. No one has the right to instill fear or manipulate others under the guise of rules or authority. Silence is complicity. Documentation is power. Courage, paired with careful strategy, is transformative. The next time someone tries to assert control unjustly, remember that change begins with standing up, speaking out, and reclaiming what is rightfully yours. The HOA Karen, who once loomed over every porch and driveway, is now just a cautionary tale. A reminder of what can happen when power is unchecked, and what can be achieved when a community decides to reclaim its own. Months of anxiety, stress, and uncertainty were replaced with clarity, empowerment, and connection. And as I look around at our neighborhood now, buzzing with life, laughter, and genuine camaraderie, I know one thing for certain: justice delayed may test you, but it is never denied when courage meets preparation. And so, the story ends not with bitterness, but with a sense of triumph, a restored sense of community, and a powerful question for anyone listening. How long would you wait before standing up to someone who thinks they can control your life?